Sarah Martinez stepped onto the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility grounds with her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The morning sun cast long shadows across the shooting range where dozens of Navy SEALs were already warming up for their quarterly marksmanship assessment. At 24 years old, Sarah looked nothing like what these elite warriors expected from someone who claimed to be an expert marksman. The whispers started immediately. Sarah stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her civilian clothes consisted of faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt that had seen better days. She carried herself quietly, almost meekly, which only made the seasoned operators more skeptical about her presence among them. Commander Jake Thompson, a 15-year SEAL veteran with arms covered in tactical tattoos, was the first to notice her approaching the registration desk. He nudged his teammate, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, and pointed in Sarah's direction with a smirk. "Look what the cat dragged in," Thompson muttered under his breath. "Somebody's lost tourist thinks this is a public shooting gallery." Rodriguez chuckled as he watched Sarah fumble slightly with her paperwork at the check-in table. The range officer, Petty Officer Davis, looked equally confused as he reviewed her documentation. Sarah had been invited to participate in this exclusive assessment through a special program designed to evaluate civilian marksmanship instructors for potential military contracts. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" Davis asked politely, though his tone suggested he doubted her credentials. "This is a Navy SEAL qualification shoot. The civilian range is about 2 miles down the road." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm here for the contractor evaluation program," she replied softly, handing him her invitation letter. "Sarah Martinez." Davis squinted at the official paperwork, then at Sarah, then back at the papers. He scratched his head and called over to Commander Thompson. "Hey, Commander, you know anything about this contractor program?" Thompson sauntered over with the confidence that came from years of combat deployments and special operations training. His massive frame towered over Sarah as he examined her invitation. Several other SEALs gathered around, their curiosity piqued by the unusual situation. "Well, I'll be damned," Thompson said with barely concealed amusement. "Looks like the pencil pushers in Washington want to see how civilian instructors stack up against real operators." He looked down at Sarah with a patronizing smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this assessment is designed for people who've been in life-or-death situations. We're talking about precision shooting under extreme stress conditions." Sarah nodded quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Understand, sir. I'm prepared for whatever the assessment requires." This response triggered a round of poorly suppressed laughter from the gathering SEALs. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression mixing amusement with genuine concern. "Listen, sweetheart," he said in what he probably thought was a kind tone. "These aren't paper targets at your local gun club. We're talking about moving targets, stress positions, time constraints, and scenarios that simulate actual combat conditions. Maybe you should reconsider before you embarrass yourself." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her polite demeanor. "Thank you for the warning. I'd still like to participate if that's allowed." Commander Thompson exchanged glances with his teammates, and Sarah could practically see the gears turning in his head. The commander was known throughout the SEAL community for his competitive nature and his pride in his unit's superiority. The idea of a small civilian woman attempting their qualification course seemed to amuse him greatly. "You know what?" Thompson announced loudly enough for most of the range to hear. "Let's make this interesting. If our little marksmanship instructor here thinks she can hang with Navy SEALs, let's see what she's got." The buzz of conversation across the shooting range began to die down as word spread about the unusual situation. SEALs who had been focused on their own preparations started drifting over to observe what was becoming quite a spectacle. Staff Sergeant Kevin Bulldog Barnes, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of military service, approached the group with obvious skepticism written across his hard face. "What's all the commotion about, Commander? We've got ourselves a civilian contractor who thinks she can outshoot Navy SEALs," Thompson explained with evident glee. I'm thinking we should give her a warm welcome to our little qualification course. Barnes looked Sarah up and down, taking in her unremarkable appearance and obvious nervousness. Commander, maybe we should start her off with something more appropriate for her skill level. Perhaps the basic marksmanship course that we use for new recruits. This suggestion was met with nods of agreement from several of the gathered SEALs. They weren't trying to be deliberately cruel, but their years of training and combat experience made it difficult for them to imagine that this small civilian woman could possess anywhere near their level of shooting expertise. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice still quiet but with a slight edge that most of the men missed entirely. If it's all the same to you, I prefer to take the same assessment as everyone else. I didn't come here for special treatment. The range had grown increasingly quiet as more SEALs became aware of the developing situation. What had started as a routine qualification day was turning into unexpected entertainment. Several of the more experienced operators exchanged knowing looks, remembering similar situations from their careers where overconfident civilians had learned hard lessons about the difference between recreational shooting and military precision. Commander Thompson's grin widened. He was clearly enjoying the attention and the opportunity to demonstrate his unit's superiority in front of so many witnesses. Well, if the lady insists on the full treatment, who are we to deny her? He turned to address the growing crowd of spectators. Gentlemen, it looks like we're about to witness something special today. The assessment course that these SEALs were preparing to tackle was notoriously difficult, designed to test not just marksmanship, but also mental toughness, adaptability, and performance under extreme pressure. The course consisted of multiple stages, each more challenging than the last, with strict time limits and penalty systems that could quickly eliminate even experienced shooters. Range Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, a stern man in his 50s who had overseen thousands of these assessments, approached the group with obvious irritation at the disruption to his carefully planned schedule. "What's the holdup here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. "We got a full roster of shooters to get through today, and we're already running behind schedule." Commander Thompson quickly explained the situation, and Williams studied Sarah with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every type of shooter imaginable walk onto his range. Unlike the younger SEALs who were making assumptions based on appearance, Williams had learned to reserve judgment until he saw actual performance. "Ma'am," Williams addressed Sarah directly, "I need to be clear about what you're signing up for. This qualification course has a failure rate of about 30%, even among experienced operators. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." Williams nodded curtly. "Very well. But I'm going to require you to sign additional waivers acknowledging the increased difficulty and accepting full responsibility for your participation." He turned to his assistant. "Get her the contractor liability forms." As Sarah filled out the additional paperwork, the crowd of spectators continued to grow. Word was spreading throughout the facility that something unusual was happening at the marksmanship assessment, and off-duty personnel were beginning to gather to witness the spectacle. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been watching Sarah complete her paperwork, leaned over to whisper to Commander Thompson, "Commander, maybe we should offer her some basic instruction first. I mean, if she gets hurt or completely fails, it's going to reflect poorly on our professionalism." Thompson waved off his concern. "She's a grown woman who insisted on the full course. Besides, a little humility never hurt anyone. Maybe this will teach her to respect what we do here." What none of the assembled SEALs knew was that Sarah Martinez had grown up on a ranch in rural Montana, where shooting wasn't a hobby or a profession. It was a daily necessity. From the age of 8, she had been responsible for protecting livestock from predators, hunting for food, and maintaining the ranch's security in an area where the nearest neighbor was 15 miles away and law enforcement response time was measured in hours, not minutes. Her father, a former Marine sniper who had served 2 tours in Vietnam, had taught her that shooting was about much more than just hitting targets. It was about patience, breathing control, understanding wind and weather conditions, and, most importantly, performing under pressure when failure meant life or death for the animals under her care. By the time Sarah was 16, she was regularly making shots that impressed even her father's Marine buddies when they visited the ranch. She could consistently hit targets at distances that most recreational shooters couldn't even see clearly, and she could do it while lying in snow, rain, or blazing summer heat. After high school, Sarah had worked as a hunting guide and shooting instructor while attending college part-time. She had trained law enforcement officers, military personnel on leave, and competitive shooters from around the country. Her reputation for turning average shooters into exceptional marksmen had grown steadily, leading to her invitation to participate in this military contractor evaluation program. But looking at her now, surrounded by men who had dedicated their lives to warfare and special operations, none of this was apparent. To them, she was just another civilian who had probably watched too many action movies and thought shooting was easier than it actually was. As Sarah finished her paperwork and handed it back to Range Master Chief Williams, Commander Thompson called for attention from the assembled crowd. "All right, gentlemen, gather around," he announced. "We're about to begin today's assessment with a special demonstration. Our civilian contractor here has requested to run the full qualification course alongside our operators." He paused for effect, allowing the murmurs of disbelief to ripple through the crowd. "I think we should all watch carefully. This could be very educational for everyone involved." The SEALs formed a loose semicircle around the starting position, their expressions ranging from amused anticipation to genuine concern for Sarah's welfare. Several of the more experienced operators had begun to feel slightly uncomfortable with the circus-like atmosphere that was developing, but none wanted to speak up and risk appearing soft in front of their teammates. Range Master Chief Williams called Sarah forward to the starting line. "Ma'am, I'm going to explain the course one more time, just to be absolutely clear about what you're attempting." His tone was professional, but carried an undertone of paternal concern. Stage 1 consists of precision shots at stationary targets from various positions and distances. Stage 2 involves moving targets and time constraints. Stage 3 includes stress positions and simulated combat scenarios. Each stage must be completed within specific time limits, and your final score is based on both accuracy and speed. Sarah nodded her understanding, her expression calm despite the dozens of eyes focused on her every movement. She had requested to borrow a rifle from the facility's arsenal rather than bringing her own weapon, which had prompted additional smirks and comments about her lack of preparation. "What rifle would you prefer?" Williams asked, gesturing toward the rack of precision weapons available for the assessment. Sarah examined the available options carefully, her hands moving over the different rifles with obvious familiarity. She selected a standard military-issue precision rifle that most of the SEALs were intimately familiar with, rather than opting for any of the more specialized or high-end options available. "This one will be fine," she said simply, checking the rifle's action and sights with practiced efficiency. Commander Thompson couldn't resist another comment. "Good choice. That's the same rifle most of our guys train on in boot camp. Should be simple enough for you to figure out." Sarah merely nodded, beginning her pre-shooting routine of checking the weapon's zero and familiarizing herself with its particular characteristics. Her movements were methodical and precise, but to the watching SEALs, they appeared hesitant and uncertain. As she prepared for the first stage of the assessment, Sarah found herself thinking about all the times she had been underestimated throughout her life. Growing up as a small woman in rural Montana, she had constantly faced skepticism about her abilities. Ranch hands, hunting clients, and even family friends had made assumptions about her capabilities based on her appearance, only to be surprised when she consistently outperformed their expectations. The difference was that this time, the stakes felt higher. These weren't ranch hands or weekend warriors questioning her abilities. These were elite military operators whose respect she actually wanted to earn. The mockery stung more than she cared to admit, but it also fueled a familiar fire of determination that had driven her to excel throughout her life. Range Master Chief Williams positioned himself beside Sarah at the firing line, his stopwatch ready and his scorecard prepared. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am. You have 90 seconds to engage 6 targets at varying distances using different shooting positions." The shooting range fell completely silent as Sarah settled into her first position. Commander Thompson stood directly behind her with his arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone about to witness a predictable disaster. The assembled SEALs waited with a mixture of anticipation and second-hand embarrassment for what they assumed would be an inevitable failure. What none of them expected was for Sarah Martinez to take a deep breath, settle her rifle into a perfect shooting stance, and prepare to show them exactly what a lifetime of real-world marksmanship experience looked like when applied to their military assessment course. Sarah's first shot echoed across the range with a sharp crack that every experienced shooter recognized as the sound of precision. The bullet struck dead center of the first target at 200 yards, a grouping so perfect that Range Master Chief Williams had to look twice through his spotting scope to confirm what he was seeing. The murmur of conversation among the assembled SEALs died instantly. Commander Thompson's confident smirk faltered as he watched Sarah smoothly transition to her second position without any of the hesitation or uncertainty he had expected to see. Her second shot followed within 3 seconds of the first, striking the 300-yard target with the same devastating accuracy. The assembled crowd began to shift uncomfortably as they realized that what they were witnessing wasn't beginner's luck or a simple paper target exercise. Sarah moved through the first stage of the assessment with a fluid grace that spoke of thousands of hours of practice under real-world conditions. Each shot was deliberate, controlled, and devastatingly accurate. She transitioned between prone, kneeling, and standing positions with an efficiency that impressed even the most experienced operators in the crowd. When a 90-second timer expired, Sarah had successfully engaged all 6 targets with a precision that exceeded the qualification standards by a significant margin. Range Master Chief Williams lowered his spotting scope and stared at his scorecard in disbelief. "Perfect score," he announced to the stunned crowd. 6 out of 6 hits, all in the center ring. The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Thompson stepped forward to examine the targets through the spotting scope himself, certain that there had been some mistake. What he saw confirmed Williams' assessment and left him speechless. Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to break the uncomfortable quiet. "That was actually pretty impressive," he admitted grudgingly. "But stage 1 is just the warm-up. Wait until she gets to the moving targets." Sarah overheard this comment and allowed herself a small smile. Moving targets had been a daily reality during her ranch years, when she had been responsible for stopping predators that threatened livestock. Coyotes, wolves, and occasionally mountain lions didn't stand still and posed for photographs while she took careful aim. Stage 2 of the assessment involved engaging targets that appeared at random intervals and moved across the range at varying speeds and directions. Shooters had to identify threats, acquire targets, and make accurate shots while under significant time pressure. The failure rate for this portion of the course was particularly high, even among experienced operators. Range Master Chief Williams reset the course and called Sarah to the new starting position. "Ma'am, for this stage you'll be engaging 8 targets that will appear for only 5 seconds each. You'll need to identify which targets represent threats based on their markings and engage only the appropriate ones. Shooting non-threat targets results in significant point deductions." Sarah nodded her understanding and settled into position. The crowd of watching SEALs had grown even larger as word continued to spread throughout the facility about the unexpected performance they were witnessing. Staff Sergeant Barnes leaned over to whisper to one of his teammates. "Maybe she's some kind of competitive shooter. You know, like those Olympic types who can hit small targets but have never shot at anything that shoots back." This theory provided some comfort to the assembled operators, who were struggling to reconcile Sarah's obvious shooting ability with their preconceived notions about civilian capabilities. It allowed them to maintain their sense of superiority while acknowledging her unexpected skill level. The electronic target system activated, and the first moving target appeared on the left side of the range. Sarah's rifle tracked smoothly to the target, and her shot struck home with the same precision she had demonstrated in Stage 1. The target disappeared, and she immediately began scanning for the next threat. What the watching SEALs didn't understand was that Sarah's ranch experience had taught her to shoot at targets that not only moved, but actively tried to avoid being shot. A coyote running through brush at dusk while carrying off a lamb was a far more challenging target than the predictable mechanical movers used in military training. Over the next 2 minutes, Sarah engaged 8 different targets with only 1 miss, a result that would have been impressive for any of the SEALs watching her performance. More importantly, she correctly identified all threat versus non-threat targets, avoiding the penalty deductions that often eliminated shooters from this stage of the assessment. Commander Thompson found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching his assumptions crumble in real time. The small civilian woman he had dismissed as a lost tourist was outperforming many of his own team members on a course designed to test elite military operators. "Lucky day," he muttered to Sergeant Rodriguez, though his tone suggested that even he didn't believe his own explanation. Range Master Chief Williams called out Sarah's score for Stage 2. 7 hits out of 8 targets engaged, perfect threat identification, completed within time limit. He paused to double-check his calculations. Current overall score places her in the top 15% of all shooters who have attempted this assessment. The news hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. These weren't just Navy SEALs watching Sarah's performance. They were some of the most elite warriors in the entire military, men who had dedicated their lives to achieving the highest levels of combat effectiveness possible. Several of the operators began to seriously reconsider their initial assessments of Sarah's capabilities. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, no relation, a sniper with multiple combat deployments, studied Sarah with new interest. "Where exactly did you train?" he asked her during the brief break between stages. Sarah's answer was simple and delivered without any trace of boastfulness. "My family's ranch in Montana. Started when I was 8 years old." This response prompted another round of whispered conversations among the SEALs. Ranch shooting was something many of them understood and respected, but they had never encountered a civilian whose ranch experience translated so effectively to military-style assessments. Stage 3 represented the most challenging portion of the course, designed to test shooting ability under extreme stress conditions. Shooters had to engage targets while wearing full gear after physical exertion and under simulated combat conditions that included time pressure, multiple target types, and environmental stressors. Before beginning Stage 3, Range Master Chief Williams pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Ma'am, I want you to understand that this final stage is where we typically see the highest injury rate. The stress positions required can be physically demanding, and the simulated combat conditions have caused some shooters to panic or make dangerous mistakes." Sarah appreciated his concern, but she had experienced real stress while protecting her family's livelihood from genuine threats. The artificial stressors of a training course, while challenging, couldn't compare to the pressure of knowing that a missed shot might mean losing livestock that represented months of work and significant financial investment. "I understand the risks," she replied calmly. "I'm ready to proceed." Williams nodded and led her to the starting position for Stage 3. The course layout was immediately intimidating. Obstacles, barriers, and shooting positions that required significant physical strength and endurance to navigate successfully. Commander Thompson had regained some of his confidence as he observed the physical challenges ahead. "This is where size and strength really matter," he announced to his gathered teammates. "She might be a decent shot, but this stage separates the warriors from the weekend shooters." The physical demands of Stage 3 were indeed significant. Shooters had to low-crawl under barriers, climb over obstacles, and engage targets from awkward positions that tested both marksmanship skills and physical conditioning. The course was designed to simulate the chaos and physical demands of actual combat operations. Sarah began Stage 3 by sprinting 50 yards to the first obstacle while carrying full equipment. Her smaller stature actually proved advantageous as she navigated under barriers that larger shooters found more challenging. Years of ranch work had given her a wiry strength and endurance that wasn't immediately apparent, but served her well under these conditions. Her first shots from the stress position were slightly less accurate than her previous performances, but still well within qualification standards. The physical demands of the course were taking their toll, but her breathing control and mental focus remained steady. As Sarah progressed through the increasingly difficult stages, the crowd of watching SEALs grew quieter and more thoughtful. What they were witnessing wasn't just unexpected shooting ability. It was a demonstration of mental toughness and physical capability that commanded genuine respect. Sergeant Rodriguez found himself rooting for Sarah's success despite his initial skepticism. "You know what?" he said to Commander Thompson. "Maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe the question isn't whether she belongs here, but what we can learn from her approach." Thompson wasn't ready to concede defeat, but he was struggling to maintain his dismissive attitude as Sarah continued to perform at a level that exceeded most of his team's capabilities. The competitive fire that made him an effective SEAL leader was now working against him, making it difficult to acknowledge Sarah's obvious competence. The final challenge of Stage 3 required Sarah to engage multiple targets from an elevated position after climbing a rope and navigating a series of obstacles designed to exhaust and disorient shooters. Many qualified operators struggled with this portion of the assessment, and it was where Thompson expected Sarah's limitations to finally become apparent. Sarah approached the rope climb with visible determination. Her smaller size meant she had to work harder than larger shooters to complete the physical challenge, but her technique was sound and her persistence undeniable. She reached the elevated platform breathing hard but still focused and ready to engage the final targets. The targets for this portion appeared at varying distances and elevations, requiring rapid target acquisition and precise shooting while dealing with fatigue and an unstable shooting platform. Sarah steadied herself, controlled her breathing, and began engaging the targets with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated throughout the assessment. Her first 3 shots were perfect. The 4th clipped the edge of the target ring, but still counted as a hit. The 5th and 6th shots returned to the center ring, and her final shot struck home just as the time limit expired. Range Master Chief Williams called for a ceasefire and began tallying the final scores while Sarah climbed down from the elevated platform. The entire range remained silent as everyone waited for the official results of what had become the most memorable qualification assessment any of them had ever witnessed. When Williams finally announced the results, his voice carried a tone of professional respect that hadn't been present at the beginning of the day. Final score for Contractor Martinez: 91% overall accuracy, completed all stages within time limits, perfect threat identification, no safety violations. The number hit the assembled crowd like a thunderbolt. 91% was a score that many of the watching SEALs had never achieved themselves, despite years of training and multiple attempts at the qualification course. Commander Thompson stood frozen in place. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The small civilian woman he had dismissed as a lost tourist had just outperformed the majority of his elite unit on their own assessment course. But the real shock was yet to come. Range Master Chief Williams consulted his historical records and made an announcement that would be talked about in SEAL training circles for years to come. According to our records, Contractor Martinez's score of 91% represents the 3rd highest score ever recorded on this assessment course. He paused to let this information sink in. The only higher scores were achieved by our Master Chief Sniper instructors, both of whom have over 20 years of military experience. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Sarah Martinez, the ranch girl from Montana who had been mocked and dismissed just hours earlier, had proven herself capable of outshining some of the most elite warriors in the world. The transformation in the atmosphere was immediate and profound. The The same SEALs who had gathered to witness what they expected to be an embarrassing failure now found themselves dealing with a reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about civilian capabilities and military superiority. Commander Thompson was the first to step forward, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and grudging admiration. The swagger and condescension that had characterized his earlier interactions with Sarah were completely gone, replaced by the kind of respect that warriors reserve for proven competence. "Ma'am," he said, extending his hand to Sarah, "I owe you an apology. That was exceptional shooting." The words came slowly, as if he was still processing what he had witnessed. "Where did you say you learned to shoot like that?" Sarah shook his hand with a firm grip, her expression showing no trace of smugness or vindication despite the dramatic reversal in how she was being treated. "Like I mentioned, I grew up on a working ranch. When you're responsible for protecting livestock from predators and putting food on the table, you learn to make every shot count." This simple explanation resonated with the assembled operators in a way that fancy credentials or competitive achievements never could have. These were men who understood the difference between recreational shooting and shooting when the stakes were real, when failure had genuine consequences. Sergeant Rodriguez approached with obvious respect, no longer the patronizing tone he had used earlier. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we see a lot of civilian shooters come through here. Competitive marksmen, law enforcement instructors, even some former military contractors. But what you just did, that's something different entirely." Chief Petty Officer Martinez joined the growing group around Sarah, his experienced, having recognized something during her performance that others had missed. "Your breathing control during Stage 3 was textbook perfect, even under stress. That's not something you learn from weekend shooting courses. How long have you been shooting professionally?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I've been shooting since I was 8, but I only started instructing professionally about 6 years ago. Most of my clients are law enforcement or military personnel who want to improve their long-range capabilities." Range Master Chief Williams approached with Sarah's official scorecard and an expression of professional admiration that spoke volumes about her achievement. "Ma'am, I've been running this assessment for 12 years. I've seen Olympic shooters struggle with Stage 2. I've seen combat veterans with multiple deployments fail Stage 3 completely. What you accomplished today was truly exceptional." He handed her the scorecard, which would become part of the official record for the contractor evaluation program. "I'd like your permission to use your performance as a case study for our instructor development program. The way you adapted to each stage while maintaining consistent accuracy is something our own instructors could learn from." This request represented the ultimate validation from the military training establishment. Sarah had gone from being dismissed as an unqualified amateur to being recognized as someone whose techniques were worth studying and emulating. Staff Sergeant Barnes, the grizzled veteran who had suggested giving Sarah an easier course earlier in the day, stepped forward with obvious chagrin. "Ma'am, I've got to eat some crow here. When I first saw you this morning, I figured you were going to hurt yourself or embarrass us all. Instead, you just show me that I've got some things to learn about judging people." The honesty in his admission reflected the broader transformation taking place among all the observers. These were professional warriors who had built their careers on accurate assessment of capabilities and threats. Sarah's performance forced them to confront their own biases and assumptions in a way that was both humbling and educational. As word of Sarah's achievement spread throughout the facility, off-duty personnel began arriving to meet the civilian contractor who had outshot some of their best operators. The story was already becoming legendary, with details growing more impressive with each retelling. Commander Thompson found himself in the unusual position of having to explain to his superior officers how a civilian had achieved one of the highest scores in the history of their assessment course. Rather than trying to minimize Sarah's achievement, he had gained enough perspective to recognize its significance. "Sir," he reported to Captain Williams, the facility commander who had come to investigate the commotion, "we just witnessed something extraordinary. This civilian contractor didn't just pass our assessment. She excelled at it in ways that most of our own operators never achieve. Captain Williams studied Sarah with the keen eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating military personnel. Ms. Martinez, I understand you're being considered for a training contract with our special operations community. Based on what I'm hearing about your performance today, I think we need to have a serious conversation about expanding that role. This development represented far more than just validation of Sarah's shooting ability. It suggested that her unique background and proven competence could bring value to the military training establishment in ways that traditional contractor relationships never achieved. The conversation that followed would reshape how the naval special warfare community thought about civilian expertise and the potential contributions of non-military instructors. Sarah's ranch-bred practical shooting skills, combined with her professional teaching ability, offered perspectives that complemented rather than competed with military training approaches. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, the civilian program coordinator who had originally recruited Sarah for the contractor evaluation, arrived at the range just as the formal assessment was concluding. She had expected to find either a successful but unremarkable evaluation or perhaps a diplomatic failure that would require careful handling. Instead, she discovered that Sarah had achieved something unprecedented in the program's history. The implications for future civilian-military training partnerships were significant and exciting. Sarah, Dr. Harrison said after reviewing the assessment results, I think we need to completely revise our discussion about your potential role in this program. What you've demonstrated today suggests capabilities that go far beyond what we initially envisioned. The remainder of the day transformed into an informal mentoring session, with Sarah sharing insights about her shooting techniques while learning about military training methodologies from the assembled SEALs. The exchange was mutually beneficial, with both sides gaining new perspectives on marksmanship and instruction. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been one of Sarah's most vocal skeptics, found himself taking detailed notes as she explained her approach to shooting in adverse weather conditions. We train in all kinds of environments, he told her, but your ranch experience with real-world variables is something we could definitely incorporate into our programs. The respect that Sarah had earned extended beyond just her shooting ability. The way she had handled the initial mockery and skepticism with grace and determination impressed the SEALs almost as much as her marksmanship skills. They recognized the mental toughness required to perform under that kind of pressure and scrutiny. As the day wound down, Commander Thompson approached Sarah one final time. His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by genuine professional respect and curiosity about her background and training methods. Ma'am, I want you to know that what happened here today was a learning experience for all of us. Not just about shooting, but about making assumptions based on appearances. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'd consider it an honor if you'd be willing to come back and work with my team. We could all benefit from your expertise. This invitation represented a complete reversal from the morning's events, when Thompson had been openly mocking Sarah's presence at the facility. The transformation reflected both his professional integrity and his ability to recognize superior capability regardless of its source. Sarah accepted the invitation graciously, understanding that her performance had opened doors not just for herself, but potentially for other civilian instructors who might face similar skepticism in the future. Her success challenged the military community to reconsider their assumptions about where expertise could be found and how it could be effectively utilized. The drive home gave Sarah time to reflect on the day's events and their broader significance. She had come to the assessment hoping simply to qualify for a modest training contract, but she was leaving with recognition as one of the most capable shooters ever to attempt the course. More importantly, she had earned the respect of some of the most elite warriors in the world through demonstration of competence rather than credentials or connections. The experience validated everything her father had taught her about the importance of performance over appearance, substance over style. The story of Sarah's triumph spread throughout the special operations community with remarkable speed. Within weeks, Her phone was ringing with requests from military units across the country who wanted to learn from the ranch girl who had outshot the Navy SEALs. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the message she received from Range Master Chief Williams several months later. He reported that her assessment performance had become part of the standard briefing for new instructor candidates, used as an example of how diverse backgrounds could contribute to military training excellence. The lesson that Sarah Martinez taught the Navy SEALs that day went far beyond marksmanship technique. She demonstrated that expertise could emerge from unexpected places, that assumptions based on appearance or background could blind people to genuine capability, and that respect must be earned through performance rather than bestowed based on position or credentials. Her achievement also highlighted the value of real-world experience over theoretical training. While the SEALs had spent years perfecting their skills in controlled military environments, Sarah's ranch background had given her practical shooting experience under conditions that no training course could fully replicate. The transformation in how she was treated, from mockery to respect to genuine admiration, illustrated the military's capacity for recognizing and adapting to superior performance when it was clearly demonstrated. The same competitive spirit that had initially led to her dismissal ultimately facilitated her acceptance when her capabilities became undeniable. Years later, Sarah would look back on this day as a turning point in her career and her understanding of her own capabilities. The experience taught her that excellence speaks for itself, that persistence in the face of skepticism can lead to extraordinary outcomes, and that sometimes the greatest victories come from proving wrong those who underestimate your potential. The Navy SEALs learned equally valuable lessons about the dangers of assumptions, the importance of keeping open minds about where expertise might be found, and the reality that military training, while exceptional, did not represent the only path to extraordinary capability. Sarah Martinez had walked onto that range as an unknown civilian contractor. She left as a legend whose story would be told in military training circles for years to come. A reminder that sometimes the most unlikely person in the room might turn out to be the most capable one present.